Magna Carta, the story of freedom. What is Magna Carta? Magna Carta was issued in June 1215 and was the first document to put into writing the principle that the king and his government was not above the law. It sought to prevent the king from exploiting his power, and placed limits of royal authority by establishing law as a power in itself. When was Magna Carta first issued? The first version of it was issued in 1215 at Runnymede, an otherwise obscure field lying next to the Thames in Berkshire between Windsor and Staines. Charters granting rights and liberties to individuals and groups were issued by lords throughout society, including the king. They were written records of someone's action and were authenticated with a wax seal. Although its form was normal for the time, Magna Carta was the product of political crisis and an uprising of the leading men of England. Crux of Magna Carta, 1215. This document guarantees barons their ancient rights. No new taxes unless a common council agrees. All free men have the right to justice and a fair trial with a jury. The monarch doesn't have absolute power. The law is above all men and applies to everyone. The one document puts into writing four huge ideas. Equally. All free citizens can own and inherit property. Widows who own property don't have to remarry. Limits on government. The idea that a government can only govern so long as it has the agreement and support of the people. The rule of law. The idea that all people and institutions are subject to and accountable to laws. Justice. The idea that the justice system should treat everyone fairly and equally. Background. King John on a stag hunt. Magna Carta originated as an unsuccessful attempt to achieve peace between royalist and rebel factions in 1215, as part of the events leading to the outbreak of the First Barons' War. England was ruled by King John, the third of the Angevin kings. Although the kingdom had a robust administrative system, the nature of government under the Angevin monarchs was ill-defined and uncertain. John and his predecessors had ruled using the principle of vis et voluntas, or force and will, taking executive and sometimes arbitrary decisions, often justified on the basis that a king was above the law. Many contemporary writers believed that monarchs should rule in accordance with the custom and the law, with the counsel of the leading members of the realm, but there was no model for what should happen if a king refused to do so. John had lost most of his ancestral lands in France to King Philip II in 1204 and had struggled to regain them for many years, raising extensive taxes on the barons to accumulate money to fight a war which ended in expensive failure in 1214. Following the defeat of his allies at the Battle of Bouvines, John had to sue for peace and pay compensation. John was already personally unpopular with many of the barons, many of whom owed money to the crown, and little trust existed between the two sides. A triumph would have strengthened his position, but in the face of his defeat, within a few months after his return from France, John found that rebel barons in the north and east of England were organizing resistance to his rule. The rebels took an oath that they would stand fast for the liberty of the church and the realm, and demanded that the king confirm the Charter of Liberties that had been declared by King Henry I in the previous century, and which was perceived by the barons to protect their rights. The rebel leadership was unimpressive by the standards of the time, even disreputable, but were united by their hatred of John. Robert Fitzwalter, later elected leader of the rebel barons, claimed publicly that John had attempted to rape his daughter, and was implicated in a plot to assassinate John in 1212. A mural of Pope Innocent III. John held a council in London in January 1215 to discuss potential reforms, and sponsored discussions in Oxford between his agents and the rebels during the spring. Both sides appealed to Pope Innocent III for assistance in the dispute. During the negotiations, the rebellious barons produced an initial document, which historians have termed the Unknown Charter of Liberties, which drew on Henry I's Charter of Liberties for much of its language. 7 articles from that document later appeared in the Articles of the Barons and the subsequent charter. Magna Carta as a source of liberty. The continuing importance of Magna Carta as a source of liberty is well established. One of the key provisions in the 1215 Charter was that imprisonment should not occur without due legal process. This also established the idea of trial by jury. Clause 39 of the 1215 Charter states that, "No free man shall be arrested or imprisoned, or exiled or in any way ruined, except by lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." This effectively established the principle of the rule of law, protecting individuals from arbitrary punishment. Of course, that's not to say all men were therefore free. The feudal system of the time saw to that. But, as with many aspects of Magna Carta, it's what this principle subsequently helped inspire that makes the Great Charter still relevant today. 10 reasons why Magna Carta is important. In the summer of 1215, King John met with a group of barons by the River Thames in Runnymede. The last few years had been a whirlwind. Unhappy with the nation's direction, a group of barons rebelled. This led to the signing of the Magna Carta, also known as the Great Charter. While its impact at the time wasn't significant, it's now known as one of the most important documents ever written. Why should we care about it today? Here are 10 reasons. It established that no one, not even a king, is above the law. Before the Magna Carta's signing, there was a constant discussion about kings and the law related to each other. Many believed that the king was the law. He wasn't bound to the same rules as everyone else. Others said that the king's responsibility was to discover the law, but that he wasn't above it and needed to follow it the same as his subjects. The Magna Carta established the rule of law and forbade the king from doing whatever he wanted. It established that no one can be arrested or exiled without reason. The Magna Carta also established due process. One of the clauses reads that no one can be detained without cause or evidence. It states that no free man can be arrested, imprisoned, disseized, which means having your property seized, outlawed, or exiled without the lawful judgment of peers or the law of the land. King John was known for taking whatever he wanted, so this clause specifically targeted that action. It established that everyone has a right to trial by jury. Without the lawful judgment of peers or the law of the land essentially establishes the right to a trial by jury. There needs to be a due process of law, which includes evidence and a trial, whenever something like being imprisoned or exiled comes up. While the phrase due process of law does not appear in the original Magna Carta, it just says law of the land. The 1354 statute of King Edward III uses the phrase as a replacement for law of the land. It hinted at early women's rights. Clause 8 of the Magna Carta reads, "No widow shall be compelled to marry, so long as she prefers to live without a husband." The clause continues to say that if she does want to remarry, she's not allowed to marry whoever she wants. Having the king or a baron step in was supposed to protect a woman from coercion. By allowing a woman to stay single after her husband died, the Magna Carta also protected her right to financial protection. It brushed up against freedom of religion. When the Magna Carta was signed, the rights of the Church of England were a top priority. There was a lot of tension between the king and the Pope. The first clause of the Magna Carta establishes the freedom of the Church for all time. This protected the power of the Church, but the meaning has been reinterpreted. It appeals to the idea of religious freedom, as well as the separation of church and state. It's a prime example of how documents and their meanings evolve. When King John's barons wrote the Magna Carta, they had no idea how the documents would be read in the future. There are 63 clauses, but we only discuss 3. If people back in 1215 learned what the Magna Carta inspired, they would no doubt be shocked and perhaps even appalled. This is an example of how humans mythologize certain events and project modern meanings on old documents. While most of the Magna Carta is completely irrelevant today, its essence has stood the test of time. It's a symbol of holding power accountable. What is the enduring essence of the Magna Carta? It's a symbol of holding power accountable. When the Magna Carta was signed, no one had high hopes for it. King John only signed it to stall for time, so as soon as the barons demanded he hold up his end of the bargain, he got the Pope to annul the document. It wasn't until 1225, when Henry III was king, that a newer version of the charter came out. After that, it was used to try to rein in the powerful kings during the Stuart period and English Civil War. It tells the story of people taking action. Even though the Magna Carta wasn't respected right after it was signed, the story of the barons forcing the king's signature is iconic. Up until that point, kings had negotiated with barons, but everything they signed into law was their own choice. The Magna Carta was the first time that barons took an active role and forced the king to hear their demands. It's no surprise that John refused to follow through, but the story is still inspiring. It planted the seed of democracy. Experts see the Magna Carta as one of the first steps toward the parliamentary democracy that England has today. Principles like the rule of law and due process are essential to democracy. The Magna Carta inspired everything from the Bill of Rights in 1689 to the Bill of Rights in the U.S. in 1791. It began the shift of power away from an all-powerful king to a more democratic structure. It paved the way for human rights. The barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta because they believed he'd crossed a line. John's actions, like heavy taxation and corruption, would now be human rights violations. By establishing the rule of law, the Magna Carta said that there are certain things not even a king can get away with. The rule of law and due process are now included in documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and England's Human Rights Act of 1998. Interested in learning more about human rights? Consider studying a master's degree.